Hi, I am Erica T. Worth, author of the Indigenous literary horror novel White Horse, which is out now with Flatiron Macmillan. And it is about Carrie, who is an urban Indian woman who loves heavy metal and loves horror, but despises her mother because she believes that her mother abandoned her when she was 2 days old. And when her cousin Debbie discovers an ancient bracelet of her mother's, and Carrie touches the bracelet, her mother's ghost begins to haunt Carrie, and a monster invades her dreams, and Carrie decides that she needs to find out what happened to her mother after all. And some of the inspiration for this novel is urban Indian life in Denver, Colorado. And it's also just, my love of heavy metal and horror, which was something where I went to school in Idaho Springs, people loved. And it's also a love song to old Denver.
Hey, it's Well Red Beard. I appreciate you being here. I'm back full time on my channel. I would love for you to come over and subscribe. Just search Well Red Beard on YouTube. I delve deep into horror. I've spent the last 3 years reading a ton of independent small press horror. There's treasure to be found there, and I go out there and find it for you. I'm not afraid to tell you the books that aren't great while telling you the books that are great. I don't break hearts or hurt feelings, but if a book doesn't work for me, I will tell you that, and I'll tell you why. I'm on a new mission now to go back and dig into some great horror from the 80s and 90s. I'm working my way through Robert McCammon's books. I'm going to look at all of Peter Straub's work. I'm going to do Brian Keene. I've got aspirations to go back and do J.F. Gonzalez, a lot of the greats, so you have a good idea of where to start. I have a video up for J.F. Gonzalez's Survivor, so you can see what all the fuss is about. I recently read Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, so you can see what all the fuss is about. I just want you to come over and subscribe. I'm trying to grow the thing. I appreciate you taking a look at it. This is Well Red Beard. I hope you're enjoying all your books as much as I am. If not, you're reading the wrong damn books.
Welcome to Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hello, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
Today, we're joined by a great friend of our show, Mercedes M. Yardley. Say hello, Mercedes.
Hi, everybody.
Today, we have a wonderful guest on. His name is Chuck Wendig, author of Wanderers and the upcoming, as of tomorrow, Wayward. Say hello, Chuck.
Hello, Chuck. Hi, guys.
And if you are interested where you can find the show, you can find us on any audio platform, Alexa, whatnot. Want the video version, go to YouTube, go to TikTok, pretty much any social media platform. If we're not there, let us know. Today, we are going to focus on Wayward, but we're going to cover a whole lot more, I assume. So let's dive into the baseline question. Chuck, what got you into horror?
Specifically, what was my first horror thing?
Oh man, that's
a good question.
It's really whatever your interpretation is. We don't have any guidelines with that.
Oh man, like when I was a kid, horror, the very idea of horror freaked me out because my sister told me, she's like, "Oh, there's this movie called The Exorcist, and people basically had heart attacks and died during it." So I kind of got it in my head at a very early age that horror had a mystical kind of power. Like horror was itself horror, like it was evil for its sake of being evil. And then I think the thing that really uncorked it for me was I went to the video store, and I assume we all kind of grew up roughly in the same era of the video store, right?
Brennan and I are the younger one, but we did grow up in the 90s. So
okay. So you
still last the video store.
You were tail end of the Blockbuster era, right?
We were
the last I'm old is what he's saying.
No.
You and I grew up in the video store.
Yeah, we grew up in the video store era. All right. So, my mom would take me to the video store, and it would be like, yeah, get whatever you want. And she's like, well, and I knew I liked science fiction, and I saw there was a movie about an alien called Alien, and I was like, I'm sure that's fine, I could just rent that. And I don't know if I was 10 years old or whatever, and we rented it, and I didn't quite realize until I was into it, I'm like, oh, this is like a horror movie, I think. And I loved it, and it was just amazing. And then my sister at one point put Robert McCammon's Swan Song in my hand, and then I think that was the final nail in that horror coffin. At that point, I was in the tomb, locked in with the rest of you ghouls, and there it was.
Geiger's artwork, the designer, for those that don't know, the designer for the sets of Alien, his art, he's one of my favorite artists because what he does with angles and reflects on just a mesh of so many things is, I don't know, it just hypnotizes you. I mean, I could see the same piece of artwork that he's done and always walk away with something different. Mercedes, jump in if you like. If not, Brennan, take us away. Brennan, go ahead.
Take us away, Brennan. I just barely saw Alien for the first time a couple years ago. So
did you really?
I loved it.
Oh,
I love it. We played the Alien game, where you have to be really quiet. It has the microphone. If you're too loud playing the game, it comes after you. And my friend's like, you haven't seen this. And we watched it as a writers group and it was phenomenal. But I can't imagine that as like a kid, seeing that as a kid, seeing that as an adult, seeing that as a kid.
It's a perfect movie.
In my mind,
the first one.
Yeah, the first one's fairly perfect. Yeah, it's a pretty legit, haunted house movie in space. Really, monster movie.
Oh, amazing, just amazing.
Brennan, take us away, sir.
Yeah, no, I'll throw my thoughts in there too. I think that I love the idea of you coming to it as an adult, Mercedes, because I feel like I watched it differently as a kid than an adult. Like Chuck said, it's a haunted house movie, but when you're watching it with young eyes, I mean, it's more of a prototypical monster movie, but then you get to kind of appreciate it on more and deeper levels as you get older and kind of garner a better understanding of it. But let's talk about The Exorcist, actually. Chuck, one thing that you said that caught my attention was the whole notion of, I guess, audience reactions, visceral audience reactions, people having a heart attack at The Exorcist.
Right.
It feels like that doesn't happen anymore.
When that was Terrifier, right? The Terrifier films are
Terrifier 2.
That story.
I haven't heard that. Okay, let's talk about that, because I want to talk about how you don't hear movies really getting that anymore. What do you think is behind that? You think we're desensitized, or?
I think, first of all, most of them, I mean, honestly, I think most of that story was marketing. The story was always the Exorcist stories were kind of marketing tales. They weren't really actually happening. But I do think there was some truth to it, not the heart attack thing, but some people being very upset and running out of the theater and stuff. And I think ultimately that's because Exorcist, was of an era of film. The 70s was an era where it really upgraded our cinematic capabilities. And so we were both with special effects and just the sort of directors taking, an auteur sort of deeper way to tell these stories. And it was something that we weren't seeing as much before that. So, I mean, the 70s is an explosion of the horror genre in a way that it wasn't before, in a way that's genuinely scary. And so I think for audiences, that was something that was really new. Whereas now it's kind of hard to do something that's legitimately I've really changed the game, so to speak. I mean, you can do some things with special effects and some things with audio effects. I mean, obviously Jurassic Park, for as much as it's not really a horror movie, though, I mean, it has some real horror movie, core, even though it's for quote unquote for kids. That was maybe a time when you had some really serious audience reactions, right? People how many times did people go see Jurassic Park? It was I think I saw 5 times in the movie theater. It's just one of those things you did. And so that was sort of a communal audience experience in a different way, and a lot of thrills, chills, frights and all that good stuff. So Terrifier 2, as I understand it, is just a viscerally disgusting movie. In ways that are great or not great, depending on your opinions of that sort of thing. So I guess that's maybe why the audience reactions are back, that they're really pushing a limit in a way that a theatrical release doesn't usually.
Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, when they did a edited, I forget how it's phrased, but when
special editions or whatever.
Well, when Lucas came back in the 90s, before the first one came out, he came out with the original trilogy in theaters. That was the first time I saw Empire Strikes Back with my father.
Yeah.
So I was a I don't know, 9, 10, whatever it was. And I was just hypnotized. And for me, we're talking about experiences in theaters where it just it pulls you to a whole new level. And that's what it did for me. And the second time that's not horror is the Fellowship of the Rings. I was blown away with the trailer when it came out. I was a young kid. And then when I saw it, I didn't really know how to react. It's like the world disappeared and that movie was all that existed.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mercedes.
I have a question too. So now that we're watching, when a show comes out, we're not having that theater experience like we used to, right? Where,
Right.
you know, you're waiting for it to come out, you're getting it on a Redbox, you're getting it on one of your things. Do you feel that that kind of disseminates our experience? Like, it used to be, you know, we're all going to go watch the Fellowship of the Ring. We all watched it. It was what was out. We all watched it. We all shared it. And now I feel like it's kind of pitter pattering, like people go see things at different times. We're kind of missing that. I mean, do you feel like
communal experience? Is that where you're going for?
Or do you think that by being able, like, be more accessible to other people, that we're still sharing that experience? Like, I feel like kind of some of the things about, oh, this movie really hit us. It was really different. Like Blair Witch, right? Kind of turned everything on its head. It was like the found footage, you know, beginning of that. Would that have been as effective if we all hadn't seen it at the same time, if we were seeing it at different times?
Well, Blair Witch might have, I mean, arguably Blair Witch did hit that way because it hit weirdly, like it kind of built, Blair Witch built in ways that like some of the other things don't. Like Jurassic Park was just everybody descended upon the theater at one time. And I think Blair Witch had week after week, it kind of kept doing a thing because people weren't talking about it so much. They were just like, you have to go, but they didn't say what it was. So I think that's, you know, there's also kind of different sort of mounting cinematic experiences that we also still don't get because we are, as you say, sort of spreading out into our houses. I think probably the only thing recently that's like I can think of that we all, like, everyone has to go is like the Avengers movies, right? Like everybody has the Marvel thing has really taken over, you know, for whatever one feels about that, good or bad. They've taken over movies, and that's kind of the dominant blockbuster. Everyone goes and sees this thing so they don't get spoiled the next day. They share in these moments. I don't know that these most recent wave of Marvel movies has had any of those meaningful moments that I hear about, but certainly like the Avengers, you know, Endgame stuff with the hammer and all that, the Thanos, like seem to be like they capture those audience reactions on YouTube to be like, you can go watch to see how everyone as one experiences this moment. But I think the pandemic kind of kicked a lot of it in the teeth as well, because there's not as much ability to go to the movies. I mean, there is now, we go, but it took a while to get the wheels back on that bus.
Right. Kind of kicked everything in the teeth.
Everything. Yeah.
The finale for Seinfeld, I remember my family and I used to love watching that. We would watch it with a big group for the season finale. That kind of was the last time I can remember where it was kind of like that for television specifically.
Yeah.
Because, you know, nowadays it's like, this is a good example. I ran off real quick to give my wife her laptop. Audio listeners can't see that, but I'm bringing that up because when I came back, my son, he's almost 3. He's like, Dad, help. And I'm like, you can watch a commercial every now and then, little buddy. And then I walk by because, you know, he gets upset if there's an ad, but I'm not a big, that doesn't teach him patience. And, you get instant gratification with the way everything's functioning right now. And that kind of goes into the whole, you know, not having a moment or a communal moment where you can just enjoy something. Can I steer towards The Wanderers, or do you guys want to stay on this?
Well, I mean, I don't hate if you want to talk about my books, but I mean,
you insist.
If you insist.
For starters,
I don't hate watching Chuck's face when you talk about his book. I'm excited for that.
Came out July 2nd, 2019. So that's in the heart of the scariest part of the actual pandemic that happened. Oh wait, no, I got my.
Oh no, it came out pre-pandemic.
Oh wait, no, I'm mixing up my year. Holy shit!
Yeah, we've been in this so long that.
Yeah. Okay, my apologies. That came out right before the pandemic, a few months before. Wow, that is weird. Time flies by too quick. Yeah. What the hell was that?
Sorry, something fell. I'm having things. My house is haunted. That's all.
Oh, that's all right.
It was very angry that we're talking about this stuff. Yeah, your house.
It's just like a Jed Shepherd movie. So it comes up before that, and I'm curious, like, how do you, Chuck, personally feel when you write this big book? Because I mean, it's in a lot of people's hands.
Yeah,
and you know, it's reflective of. Correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's reflective of a lot of things. But one of them is, you know, super hardcore radical right wingers. Yeah. And it's scary. It's scary because it's obviously before and I'll say it on air, domestic terrorist attack, January 6th. But like, if that continued, you got what you got with that President Creel and his people, and I just want to hear what your thoughts are on really any way you want to take that. That was really a comment, not a question. So whichever way you want to take that, man.
I agree. All of that is true. Period. End of sentence. We did it. I don't know. I mean, that was definitely one of those things where the book was, I always say when I wrote this book, I was a greedy, lazy writer because I had all these sort of anxieties and things and fears and concerns for the world. And I didn't research these things for Wanderers or after Wanderers or during the writing. It was just stuff I was reading kind of on my own and learning about because, whether it's, tonguing a broken tooth or like helping actually assuage my anxieties, I was just reading about this stuff. Whether you're talking about the, white encroaching sort of right-wing Christian fascism or, post-antibiotic age or climate change, pandemics, obviously. So I was reading about all that stuff just because I was interested in it. And when it came time, I had the core idea for Wanderers like 4 years before I wrote it or even sold it. The idea of people coming together and sleepwalking to an unknown destination. And like an idea is, writers love to sort of lionize their ideas, but ideas are meaningless without something to go with them, without a story to go with them. And I had no story. I just had this sort of mechanism. So it wasn't until I was reading all this stuff and then the Trump era kind of started. He wasn't yet president or wasn't even really running yet, but he was talking about running. And so all of these things came together and it kind of catalyzed for me what this book was. And it was sort of, I always say like Wanderers became my anxiety Voltron. It was just like all of my anxieties coming together at one. And I'm like, well, I could milk this over like 5 different types of books, but I'm like, I'm just going to literally cram all of this into one story and make it do its thing. So that's, what you were talking about is definitely the leg of that particular anxiety Voltron for sure.
And I love the idea of just knowing it starts with the people walking toward, I don't know if you had the destination in mind at the time, but a destination.
Yeah.
And because that's the way it unfolds. That's the way it unfolds to the reader is just something weird is happening and wander along for the journey, if you like. Yeah. So I wonder, when you pitched this and the ideas started to kind of formulate, did you know what a big bastard it was going to be?
No, I did not. I had no idea how big it was going to be because up until that point, I think the longest book I'd ever written was about 125,000 words. And usually I marked my books with what you would probably consider thriller pacing. Like I was always trying to be like, let's keep it fast and moving. Yeah. And so I was writing Wanderers and I was about a week before deadline on that book. And I was, I think, 180,000 words into it. And I was nowhere near ending this book. So I was like a week away and I contacted my editor and I was like, so this is obviously not ideal. I've never whiffed on a deadline before. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to whiff on this one either. I'm going to make it work. Like I figured out like I'll do a Lostian sort of time jump. I can totally, make this, bring it together in this last week of writing and get you something by deadline. And she was like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. She was probably nicer about it. But she was like, don't do that. Do not do any of the things you just said. She's like, just make it as big as it needs to be and get it to me when you can get it to me. And I was like, are you okay? Or are you a hostage right now? That's a weird thing for an editor to say to a writer, that you don't want it on deadline. So she said, yeah, just give it the time to breathe. And I added another 100,000 words over the next like 3 to 6 months of writing that book. So it was good. She gave me that time to make it the epic beast of weirdness that it ended up being.
And how much of the finished ginormous product made it to the final version versus how much did you? I'm always amazed when somebody writes this like doorstopper and we have them on and they're like, yeah, it's 240,000 words, but we actually cut another 80,000.
Believe it or not, I added a little to it and we didn't cut. It was all line edit cuts. It was very minor. The actual story, the draft that I started with, the only really change that made from first draft to second that was significant was in the beginning, Benji was a little too nice. And so, it was like one of those things where fiction is really interesting that in the beginning, it's like walking. If you're going to walk across the country, you're going to walk East Coast to West Coast. the angle you point your feet in really matters depending on how far astray you're going to be off your destination. If you point your feet just 2 degrees to the left, by the time you hit West Coast, you're going to be in an entirely different spot than you anticipated. And so just having that core change in the beginning where it sort of like roughed up his character a little bit and had this kind of scandal in his past that he was removed from the CDC and he's, tarnished as a sort of a person, which also makes him more interesting, I think, to Black Swan when it looks for him. It cascaded throughout the book and just sort of tightened the whole thing up and gave it kind of his character specifically a really interesting through line. And that was it. Otherwise, it was the book that I wrote ended up being largely the book that landed. And Wayward was the same way. Now, some of my other books are not that way. Book of Accidents there was a lot of changes, not huge changes, not like dramatic, like we're going to cut the whole middle out, but so much like rewiring and reconnecting chapters. So it took a lot of editing to do that. But Wanderers and Wayward were weirdly together somehow. I don't know how, because they were strange to write. They were very different for me. I didn't outline them, which I usually am very much a rigorous outline. They were strange to write.
The length of Wanderers you weren't told to like trim it down. And it makes me think of like we had Peter Straub on last year and we asked him like Blue Rose trilogy. I don't say this with hyperbole. That specifically, Coco changed my life. Like Coco for me is the one book that it's on its own tier, just for personal reasons. And he was talking about The Throat being the third book in the trilogy of the Blue Rose trilogy, and he said that's his favorite book, and that his publisher told him the length of the book is how do you word it? The length of the book is basically equivalent to the reception by the readers, meaning the longer the book, especially his length of a book, it's shorter than Wayward or Wanderers, I believe, but he was basically told to cut it down or it's not going to get a great reception. I want to say that came out in the 90s, but it came out at least 2 decades ago, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Like he was one of the biggest writers ever, and he's being told this, and he's already well set in his career. But do you think it's just maybe a editor by editor, case by case scenario, or?
It's probably editor by editor. I mean, I've heard some data, and this is older data. This is not like recently this year or anything, that readers like bigger books because they have a perceived value to them. It's like, oh, I'm paying for a book, but I'm getting more for my money, which I don't, they generally cost more too if they're bigger. So I don't know that that's actually accurate in reality, but the feeling is like, oh, it's a big chunky read and I can, sit here and read this for a long time and it's like a meal that will last me. I don't know. I mean, I know different books, like, we did trim down Book of Accidents a bit. I think from 180 to 150, 160, something like that. So I think it's, for me, at least as a writer, it's really a book by book basis. And I appreciated that my editor was like, the book needs to be as long as it needs to be, which is to, obviously sort of on the one hand, that feels kind of lazy. Like, well, it's like some sort of Zen Yoda sort of thing. Well, it just needs to be as long as it needs to be, man. Don't worry about it. But I mean, I also think that that's sort of true in an implicit sort of creative way. And I think demanding that a book be shorter based on market perceptions rather than based on what the story should be is a sort of a rough path to follow.
Fair. Mercedes, you got anything that you'd like to throw in?
Yeah, well, going to Wayward, what would you cut out? I mean, there's so much there that is so rich. And I mean, yes, if you're going to streamline it, you take away this backstory, you take away these thoughts, but they were, you would lose so much. I mean, that would just be a shame,
Yeah, that would be I don't want to lose any of that. Like sometimes I know there's the feeling, and again, you read this sort of advice when you're reading things about like thriller pacing or shorter books, like, oh, you want to cut the fat or kill your darlings. And I think there's obviously value to that in the right kind of book. But I also think like you would never tell, a chef to like, well, cut the fat because the fat is the flavor. I mean, obviously you don't want to just have a mouthful of lard when you're eating it, but I mean, like, there's a rendering to fat. There's different kinds of balances to spices. Not everything. Sometimes we treat writing like it's this really utilitarian, like, well, if it doesn't serve the greater purpose, it must go. But storytelling isn't like a math equation where you're like, well, if it doesn't solve the math equation, you know, when you're making soup, like it's not just like, well, does this spice add nutrition? Then you do not add it. Like you add it because it tastes good. I don't know. It brings a texture and a depth to something. It's like, you know, I'm not a big epic fantasy reader, but you know, like feast scenes, I would be like, well, maybe you want to cut that, but that's like the literal meat and potatoes of epic fantasy. You got to be in there. They got to have the feast scene and the tapestries, and everybody knows what kind of weird dragon meat they're eating. And it's like a very specific thing, and people want that when they read that because they want that kind of texture and granularity to the world they're reading. And I think, you know, why cut that if you don't have to?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite things about Wayward was the way that you had all of your characters had such distinctly different voices. And when you're saying that you didn't, you know, outline Wanderers, I'm baffled because you just had so much going on.
Yeah.
And these characters were so different. And when they were written from each, you know, different point of view, I'm amazed you didn't have their voices blend, you know, like, I mean, that's one of the things I really like about your work, Chuck, is your characters are so distinct and memorable, but that you were able to do that in, you know, essentially these two ginormous books. And just I just can't believe it. I mean, I would read it and I would be like, I know exactly who's speaking, you know? I mean, there are all these characters we're following in all these different ways. And I know that it's Matthew, or I know that it's Pete, or, you know, just, I just bow to that because that's amazing. It wasn't,
sorry to interject.
I mean, it was Chuck, but it wasn't, you know,
that's a great point.
It was written by Chuck. It was right. This is Pete talking and I got it, you know?
Good. All right. I'll take that. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm like, that's not a question. That's just that's
a good comment. I will.
You know what though? I have a question to piggyback off that because I had kind of a similar thought, especially knowing that you know, you kind of wrote these ones by the seat of your pants, whereas you're a normal outliner. What strategies, if any, did you kind of put in place to keep track of? I mean, a book like this and pre and post-apocalyptic book, it's going to have a big cast of characters and a lot of things to keep straight. How did you keep it straight?
I don't, and that's the worst answer. So
best answer ever.
Yeah, when I went to write Wanderers is the book that told me I don't know how to write books, and that was like a really good thing to learn.
Hold up, what?
I know it sounds like you shouldn't.
Wait, explain that, man. You just blew my mind. That book is fucking awesome.
Because like
also plug your books on writing.
Yeah, right. Oops. Sorry, guys. Up until this point, like I think I had kind of mythologized or folklorized how I wrote a book, right? And it was generally pretty reliable. Like I would get up in the morning and go out to the office and have a certain setup and set up my document a certain way in 2,000 words a day, and I would get to a book. You know, it's that whole button chair, write every day kind of a thing. And then, and outlining was a really big part of my thing. Like I learned very early on, outlining was a part of my process, just an essential. Like I hate outlining, but I did it with every book. And sometimes those outlines were not for public consumption. They were definitely like the scrawlings of a psychopath with red yarn on the wall, but they were for me and they worked. So Wanderers, all I did in the beginning was I just wrote a few sample chapters of these characters to get their voices and to get a little bit of the plot going. And that's what I had it pitched to the editor on. And, you know, it defied me at every turn as to how I write a book. Cause I would be like, some days I would sit and I would try to write and it'd be like 300, 500 words. Some days I would write and it'd be a 5,000 word day. And some days I couldn't write at all. I'd be like, you know what? I just need to take this day to do some research and sort of suss some things out. In fact, actually, when I, you know, met you at StokerCon, Mercedes, like that was part of a trip that I drove across the West into Ray to actually do research for Wanderers. So all this stuff kind of was just like part of the process, but it wasn't necessarily like productive writing until it was. And then sometimes it became very productive. So just everything I thought I knew about how I wrote a book, Wanderers kind of bucked that trend. And I realized at that point that every book is its own weird, different animal. And you can't really know how to write the next one because it's not this one. So once you figure out how to write the one you're writing, the next one's going to be different anyway. And I've, instead of letting that be frustrating, because initially that's really upsetting when you're like, I think I know what I'm doing. And then you realize I don't really know what I'm doing. That's a terrifying moment, but I kind of went with it. And I sort of thought, well, maybe that's what's kind of awesome about writing too, a little bit, is that sense of free fall, that vertigo that you get from like, well, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to have to mess with it and figure it out. So yeah, I learned I don't know how to write a book, and that's maybe good.
I love the idea of writing, like, I think you put it as sample chapters to get to know the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times in my own work have I, gone back to the second draft and said, I need to know the information that's in here, but nobody needs to read this shit.
Yeah.
And, to Mercedes' point about you being able to revisit certain characters after leaving them behind for 20, 50, 100 pages and still them feeling familiar. I think that's exactly tied into that. Once you know and understand your characters, it's like you don't necessarily always have to revisit an outline. Would they say this? Would they say that? Would they make this choice? You just kind of, on an inkling.
Yeah.
So yeah, I that's what stuck out most to me is the getting to know the characters to allow them basically to dictate where the story's going.
Yeah.
My favorite character in Wayward was Gumball, and I hope one day, I legit hope one day you write a book just in his perspective, because here's the thing, and like I'm just gonna go on a limb and say you guys are probably gonna agree with this, but like dogs are incredible because they sum up every good thing in the world, and the way you phrase it as a dog, they're simple statements, but they're so deep. Yeah. And they're sad. They're really sad. I'm not going to go into detail because I'll spoil it, but the way he sees the world, he knows something's not right, but kind of makes you want to cry, because it's like looking through the eyes of a child.
Yeah, dogs like vibe stuff. They, even if they don't, I don't know how much they know in an intellectual sense, but like they vibe. They totally get when something's wrong, when they're stressed, when there's something coming. Sometimes they kind of can tell you when something's up in the air almost. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Mercedes.
A lot smarter than we can be. They don't let things affect them that we would let affect us. Like, oh, this person's status or this person, has a good reputation. And a dog would just be like, yeah, no, you're awful.
Yeah, they know.
And it's a really, everyone has that saying about how you can kind of tell about a person before you even know them, but if they get along with, in this case, dogs. Really good interpretation for that. But kind of throwing a wrench in Wayward, but I want to go back to when you became a full-time writer, late 90s. How was that transition? Because I don't think we talk about this enough, and you're a really good person, I feel like, to ask this question too. But I know that the best advice I've heard for when you become a full-time writer is make sure that you have the financial stability. But for whatever you want to speak on with this, was it scary? Was it a scary position to be in? I don't even know. I know you got a family now. I don't know if you had a family then or whatnot, but
no kids. But yeah, I was married into that. I mean, I didn't marry at the point of being a full-time writer, but I think I was, when I got married, I think it was actually becoming or leaning into the full-time writer thing. Yeah, so I started working freelance for game companies, predominantly White Wolf Game Studios, doing horror games like Vampire and Werewolf and all this stuff. And eventually I also did some editing work for them, and even some development design work. But generally it was writing. It was writing the fiction, writing the rules, writing. And so I, knew how to be. They always say you need to be two of the three things: fast, friendly, and good. And I knew I was fast and friendly. I don't know that I was any good, but I definitely got stuff done quickly, and I did it with a smile. And so they kept hiring me back. And in doing so, I learned how to hit my deadlines, and I learned how to sort of churn and burn content. When you're, I think, young, maybe it's a little easier to kind of just be like, I'm going to just do 5,000 words today, or I think one time I wrote like 30,000 words in a weekend. I'm like, I'm doing this. This let's get this done.
Wait,
and if you could do that enough, I was only getting paid like, I don't even know, it was like 5-6 cents a word or something. But at a certain point, like if I can write 1,000 words in an hour, that's like $50 an hour. And if I could kind of do that regularly and keep getting work, it provided stability at that point financially. But it's still like weird because at that time there was no ACA, so there was no easy way to get insurance. Like I was just like, well, if I die, that's just like, oh no, I got a cyst and it exploded and I'm dead. So, but having that, both getting married to someone who actually had health insurance helped. And then when the time came that it was like we could get our own insurance. That really changed the game, so to speak. The transition from freelance to being a novel writer was weird. That was like a hard year because I learned there was no real good way to do both. I couldn't keep up that kind of freelance schedule while also trying to write novels. And so I was like, I'm going to take this 1 year to try to make that work. And I did, thankfully, somehow.
That's interesting. And Brendan and Mercedes, take over after this. And I want to hear what all you guys have to say about this. Brendan and I have talked about this with a few guests. Maybe it's just the things that I see, but it seems like a lot of, I'll just say my generation writers, newer maybe, a lot of them seem to have the idea that, I got to make it now or it's not going to happen sort of deal. So I'd like to know, Chuck, what your opinion is on the longevity of pace and everything, I guess. I don't know a better way to phrase that, so I hope that made sense.
Like age, like how can you start at any time, or
as far specifically as your career goes, if there is a good or a healthy mentality to have, if you want to be a full-time writer, if you were to say, this has worked for me, maybe it'll work for you. I guess that's a better way to phrase that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's the weird thing is like you can only know by doing it. And I think you can do it at any age and start at any age. I don't think there's any sort of restriction there. I think there is a vibe, like you're saying, that if I haven't made it by X year, then it's too late. Like, and I don't think the publishing industry is really, we like to convince ourselves that it's just like a bunch of young people, like, we're all just writing wonderful fiction. We're all young. And I'm like, that's not really, I mean, a lot of people don't start in their 40s and 50s getting published. And at that point, too, you also probably have a unique perspective and maybe more patience than someone who's in their 20s or 30s. I certainly did not have good patience at that age. So I think you kind of just start when you start and do it when you do it. And it's like they're really gross. But I mean, all writing advice is bullshit. But I always say that bullshit fertilizes. So it's not that it's useless. It's just you can't treat it like it's gospel. You can't like hear people's advice to you as a writer and be like, that's what I will do then, because it never works. Like if people want to know how I did it, I'm like, well, first you have to get a freelance job in the game industry for 10 years. And it's like, what? I don't want to do that. You're like, exactly. You can't follow the path that I followed, just like I couldn't follow the path that anybody. It's just how it is. We all kind of, I always say we dig our own hole through the mountain and then we blow it up behind us. So you just do it by doing it. And that's the hardest part to tell people. Like even my own son, who wants to be like, he likes art and he likes writing and stuff. So sometimes I'm like, you just have to do it. And he wants kind of it to be good immediately. And he wants it to be, done and perfect. And I'm like, it's just, that's not how it's going to work. It's a messy, ugly process in which your worst critic will be yourself probably through all of it. And you just have to just keep digging.
That's perfect. Mercedes.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it comes to that instant gratification thing. My generation, I feel so old. Chuck and our generation.
No, our generation.
When we were children, Chuck.
Yeah.
We had to slog. You know what I mean? It wasn't like we had to slog. We had to sit through the whole show we had to sit through the commercials. We had to wait till Friday night for X-Files. We didn't have it on demand, but we had to work and work and work and work and fail and work. And like, I feel like my children, I'm trying to teach them to work, but they don't know how to work like we knew how to work.
Yeah.
Things come fast, things come instant. If you don't do it right away, you're a failure. If you don't achieve your success, my 15-year-old is like having a breakdown because she wants, doesn't know exactly what she wants to do for college. And I'm like, sweetheart, you have time. But that concept of you have time is not what society is pushing, right? So, and I tell people all the time, writing isn't like dancing. Your body's not going to give out and you can't dance anymore. You can't write anymore. Like, I'm too old to write now. That's not how it works. We can always write. We can always do these things. And I had this really cool meeting with Mort Castle, who's just this phenomenal writer person in the horror industry. And I was like, I feel like I missed my window of opportunity. And he literally put his finger on my forehead and he goes, I release you from the clock. And I was like, what? And he goes, you have all the time in the world. And like, I cried, because everyone's like, hurry, fast, faster. And he's like, no, that's not how writing works. Yeah. So I needed someone to physically tell me you are okay, you can So release us, Chuck. Release us from the clock.
God, that's great. Yeah, you're all released from the clock. I mean, that's the thing, right? People don't get it. Like, writing is one of the most super forgiving things you can do. You can be like, I wrote it and it wasn't as good, so I'm going to rewrite it, or I'm going to go back and fix it. You have as many shots at the goal as you want to take. Like, it's just no one's there protecting it except you. You're the only goal you're trying to score on. So, I mean, you just keep doing it. You just keep working on it. So many other jobs, even painting a painting, you're going to be like, well, if I screw this one up, I've screwed it up. It's too late. But you really can't forever screw it up. You can just keep, like I said, you're just digging ditches in a lot of ways. I mean, it's obviously, there's a lot of art and craft and beauty to writing too, but I mean, and the sort of mechanical component to it, you're just digging dishes, so just keep digging.
See, Chuck Wendig says you guys are released.
Yeah, released. You're free. You're free.
You're on the forehead.
Feel it on my forehead.
We're close to finding out when those bodies, the locale for those bodies are.
Yeah, I've already given you the codes, and you don't even know it yet. If you go back and replay it backward, you'll hear the longitude and latitude. It's great.
I love how, with both books, Wayward and Wanderers, I love how I learned so much shit about things I didn't even know to learn about. I'm talking about like the science, I want to talk about specifically one thing got me thinking, where when the world ends, who is really important, what's really important. And it really makes you stop thinking, because Chuck, I know you know this now because I showed you the picture, but I work at a wastewater treatment plant. And before that job, I didn't think about anything. I didn't think about the process of flushing the toilet, what happens.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. In Stephen King's The Stand, he covers that pretty well with starting a local government and having the technical minds behind, turning back electricity. And if everything is ready to be turned on and nothing was properly shut down, you're gonna have a lot of explosions.
Yeah.
It's just really, it's neat because you brought this world of fiction, your own world of the end of all happening, and the ending for Wayward is and Wanderers is it makes you wonder if there's going to be more, but you do it in a way where you can end it and it means a lot, or you can pick up where you left off and it makes sense.
That's the hope.
Yeah, no question there. So Brendan, why don't you save my ass like every episode?
You know what? I'm still ruminating on the fact that I can't even count how many times I've heard you say to a guest, you know that I work at a wastewater treatment plant because of the pictures I've sent you. And I'm wondering how we're still getting guests.
I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
late night emails, just weird, cryptic wastewater emails. It's
literally shoveling shit. I'm like, hey, Chuck, look at this while I listen to your book. Because of the people we're surrounded by, they're not that weird, but they're weirdos too, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it works. I mean, that's fascinating. I honestly find it fascinating.
Well,
Seriously, I was shoveling shit and your book got me through it. So thank you. Sorry, Mercedes.
No metaphor there.
No better compliment. No better compliment. Yeah.
So this is an aside, but are they doing an audiobook of Wayward?
Oh yeah,
How
same
many hours would that be?
I forget. It's like 38 or something. It's like a lot. It's a lot of hours.
So that can get you through a lot of hours at your job.
Yeah,
there, Pat.
Yeah.
Just hope no one from my job's listening. But yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk about kind of you have such a moral compass in your characters that tends to flip. So I'm like, I'm going to hate this guy and I'm going to hate this guy forever. And then I'm like, oh no, now I'm seeing things from his perspective and I have sympathy and I hate that.
Yeah.
Right. Or, this person is redeeming themselves a little bit, or this person is, I thought was good. And now I'm like, oh
yeah.
And it's interesting because when I think of you, I think of I think you're a very highly principled, moral person. You call things out, like Nazis, for example, right?
Say no.
A mess.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, because this is related but not related. Twitter is just crazy right now, right? And I know that
Twitter's on fire right now. Yeah.
And I know that you get a lot of, I find very undeserved ire in your direction, and people behave poorly, based on some things you say and views and things that when something happens like that, as a reader and as a fan and as a supporter, if we see somebody that is being unfairly targeted or doxxed or something like that in the Twitterverse on any social media, how do you suggest we help?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think usually the best bet is to ask the person who's under siege and see if they need anything. It's hard to know if you want to sometimes leap to defense, but if it's not a real thing, I mean, it sounds weird because it's real. It's true in that there's harassment and terror happening, but sometimes the people behind it, they're trolls, and sometimes they just want the attention. So you don't always know, but sometimes I think too, if you see someone carrying water for trolls unknowingly, like they're a person even if they're an acquaintance online who seems to have fallen for, because that's sometimes the thing is these people online will leave sort of malevolent traps, though, like disinformation and misinformation can very easily be picked up by people who mean well. I've had people tell me things about myself, even just the Tolkien stuff, the stupid, like, you hate Tolkien. Like, I've seen that get carried occasionally. Like, someone like a journalist will like, wow, this person really doesn't understand Tolkien. I'm like, none of this is a true thing. And you have a screenshot of a thing that's snipped out of an entire conversation, and you feel like you've just shared wisdom with the world, or like an outrage or whatever it is, but it's like, it's not true. So sometimes you can reach those people if they're a real person, because they can be like, oh, I didn't realize that. And I've seen that happen sometimes where people be like, hey, this didn't actually happen the way you are saying that it happened. Chuck Wendig does not burn down libraries personally with his lighter. And they'll be like, oh, I totally should have looked into that a little more. But generally speaking, I guess your best bet is always to ask the person under siege and see if they need anything, or if they're just anticipating that this is a normal, the sort of red tide, the algae bloom of weird social media existence.
Right, because you don't want to like unmeaningly throw more.
Right, yeah, because you never know. You're like, oh, I just I kicked over more bees, and now there's more bees. So
now you're drowning, and you have bees coming out.
Now there's drowning in bees. It's now, and the bees are on fire, and it's not good. Yeah,
I've seen people.
It sounds like the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to the apocalypse. Socially.
I mean, you see like peers in the sense where they're writers too. People attack Ramsey Campbell or Stephen King or you, Chuck, and I mean, I've learned at this point just to stay the hell out of it. I'm not telling anyone to do one thing or the other, but I always wonder. Oh, here's a good one, and I'll get to what I was about to say. Last year, and I've talked about this with Joe on here, Joe Lansdale. I don't even know how this got brought up, but random people were telling Joe how it wasn't okay for his own children to inherit the money Joe made. Like,
oh, I remember that. Yeah, that was insane.
I don't understand it. Like, it makes me wonder if, I don't think most people would say that shit, not to just Joe, but which would be a very bad idea. But
don't mess with Champion Joe on that one. What are you doing?
I don't think most people would say this stuff to your face, because I've had my own unwarranted, really just the most heinous things you could say to someone. And I've run into someone before, like walked by at a convention, and I'm not giving glaring death stares or anything, because I don't give a shit what they think, but I'm not hearing anything to my face. And I've experienced it. That's all I'm saying. And I think that people feel empowered. It's like being drunk and you're like, no, I can say what I really think.
Yeah. Well, they do. Like, I mean, all the Star Wars stuff I got, I didn't get any of it in person. And I've met a lot of people and I've gone to Star Wars conventions, and I've never had someone come up to me and be like, I'm mad at you for Star Wars. You broke it. And like, no actual people are mad about that. They're like clout chasing and anonymously being trolls and whatever.
Generally makes me wonder if they have experience, and none of us will know for sure, but like, have you ever experienced something truly tragic in your life? Because that puts everything in perspective.
Right.
Yeah. Or, like a pandemic that's global, maybe that will make you think.
Yeah, unfortunately, the pandemic just made people more feral because they were more online.
Oh my god!
Less, it was like,
it made it worse.
My one of my friends, she transported bodies from COVID when it started. She's with the reserve, and she's just like such a sweet person, and just. I'm bringing this up because like you look at someone and it's just a cover and you don't know the story inside unless you actually read the book. And sometimes even then there's stuff that you don't know. not telling you guys anything new. It's just worth repeating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, think of the bigger stuff.
Brennan, is there? Do you want to talk anything else more about Wayward, or would you like to go in another direction?
Yeah, I want to throw one more question out. You mentioned that your favorite character was Gumball. We were talking before we started recording. I absolutely loved Pete Corley. I thought he was just this big, loud, larger than life, lovable guy. So I'm curious, Chuck, like, do you have a character that really resonates, one character that really resonates with you? Not necessarily this is, the embodiment of you, but just one person you really enjoyed writing in that series.
Oh, that's Pete. Yeah. Because Pete represents a kind of character. Like, I think of them as like the Molotov thrower. They're like someone who enters the scene with a lit bottle and they just like, where am I going to throw this?
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. Like, you don't, like, as a writer, I think that's fun, writing these sort of chaos neutral, these like, center of the D&D alignment chart characters, like, because you really never exactly know what they're going to do. And if I, as a writer, don't really know what they're going to do, then the reader really doesn't know what they're going to do. The thing is, you can't have a whole book full of those people, because then it's just like cats on fire running into each other, which I'm sure is amusing in a sort of a digital simulation kind of a way, but not useful narratively. But having one person in there who is sort of a destabilizing presence on the narrative is both fun, because you're just like, oh, let's see what they're going to do now. Let's push some buttons and, they blew some stuff up. Cool. But it's also useful because you can use them to generate that kind of tension and energy and chaos, and allow it to sort of change those pivot points and kind of adjust the shape of the thing without people expecting that to happen. So they're really useful and fun to write. So Pete is that for me.
My favorite decade of music, decades, is the 60s and 70s rock and roll.
Nice.
And I mean, I even got a Led Zeppelin tattoo. Like, I love that genre. Yeah. And Pete 100% fits in. You throw him in with, Sex Pistols or The Who, or really any of those found in bands.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And the fact they have lyrics in it at one point, it's just going back to something that Mercedes said, how you have very distinct voices. It's like, I don't know how the hell you didn't outline it, for starters, but you rounded them all out. And it's not like we got character arcs per se for everyone. You do with Pete, for sure. But it's really impressive, man. And as a writer, it's hard to not sound like I'm kissing your ass, but as a writer,
I don't hate it. If we're just being honest, I don't entirely hate it. The internet is a rough place, so I don't mind the occasional, yeah.
But we've gotten rando comments on the show about how we kiss up. It's just like, well, we got people on that we like, so
yeah. Right. That's exactly it. Yeah.
We're not going to interrogate anyone. We're going to be like, how'd you do this, motherfucker? But
I know. This book sucks.
Yeah.
We do have some bones to pick with you about Star Wars while you're here.
That's fair. You know what? I knew it was coming. I accept it.
I was just as a writer, though, it makes me really, it fuels my fire. And that's something that I noticed for the majority of people, for the majority of fellow writers, at least in this genre, because I've heard otherwise. I don't know myself, but with horror or horror adjacent, it's just like kind of being a cheerleader, kind of like holding hands, in the sense where if you read something like Wanderers or Wayward, it's really fucking good, and you're like, I want to do something that good, and you're also expressing the enjoyment of that book towards you in this case, and it's just kind of cool, man, seeing that, and you get that in Wayward, I think, towards the end. If that's spoilery, let me know, but that's what I liked about it. There was, not that I want a happy ending all the time, but there's hope in it.
Yeah, I try to endings are tough, but I'm not a person who necessarily wants to write like a downer ending, like a soul crushing ending. I don't hate those endings. Like, I like reading them sometimes. Paul Tremblay's books are, they're like, you get to the end and you're like, I have killed you. You are dead now. I've taken your heart and stepped on it. So, and I'm like, yeah, thank you, Daddy, do it again. So, I definitely don't hate that, but like when I write an ending, I also don't want it to be a happy. I don't feel like happy endings are like realistic either. I feel like in life, a lot of times everything is really complicated. And like even talking about the characters having these sort of like moral complexity and nuance to them, I like to have that nuance. And the ending is itself kind of a character. And I want it to be, I like Pyrrhic victories. Like, yeah, you maybe accomplished something and maybe things worked out in some directions, but then, you know, at what cost and what was lost. And I think there's important time to measure the successes versus what you had to pay to get to that point. And I like an ending that has that weight. It can't just be a frictionless joy fest. Like we did it, like high fives, everybody, high fives all around. Like we, you know, there's got to be that, like, you know, and like in Survivor, if you watch Survivor, it's always like we're lighting the torches of the people we voted off the island. It's like we got to see, you know, what the cost was at the end.
I believe it was George R. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. You're not afraid to be brutal to your characters. Like there's not a character that is so precious you're not going to put them through the ringer. And I think that is really valuable because you feel that tension. Like, okay, this is Pete. You love Pete. Pete's going to have a hard time. This is Benji. You love Benji. Benji's going to have a hard time. Like there's such a brutality, and they have these, you know, soft, sweet, loving moments where they have like happiness. And then they have these things that are just like, I don't know who's going to live or who's going to die. And I love that you do that. And you're not afraid to pull those punches, because I feel like sometimes authors can be so precious about their characters. You're like, this character's just going to waltz away home. And I'm reading every scene being like, you know, we could lose any one of these guys and I'm going to genuinely mourn. So I think that's phenomenal. Thank you for
I think it's best when you can't trust your storytellers. Like when I read like Robin Hobb's Assassins books, the fantasy books, like she was one who really taught me that, like, man, sometimes she's going to like, you're going to hurt the reader. Like she's going to reach through the page, and as she stabs the character, the knife keeps going, and then it's in your chest at the end of it. And it's like, oh, that hurts, man. It makes me feel something bad, but yet I'm like kind of into it. Like I'm into it. It's weird.
Also, I'm feeling, weird. And that's great.
Yeah, I'm feeling something in this weird realm of the world we live in. So yeah.
Well, and just one more thing, and then I swear I'll be quiet, Pat. So
no, keep talking.
You didn't outline these, right? So did you know what was going to happen to your characters, or did you have an idea where you're like, well, this is going to happen to this character, or this is going to be particularly brutal, I need to prepare myself for this? Or did you just go into it and be like, bam, you know, I've exploded everything, everyone's crying, you know? Like,
I know some of the plot mechanism. Like I know some things I want to happen in terms of where they're going to end up and how some things occur. But with the characters in particular, I try to just envision sort of an arc. Like I know who they are at the beginning of the thing, and I'm like, well, what's an interesting change for them? Where are they going to get to? Who are they going to become by the end of this? And then it's sort of about kind of just stitching those pieces together to make sure that they're that way in the end. But even as I go, I'll try to course correct. If it feels like either they're doing something I don't think is suitable for their character, I'll obviously try to course correct. Or if what I'm writing on the page feels truer than maybe what I had in my mind, because a lot of times that's what's really happening. I have these sort of lofty visions of like, they will do this in the end, there will be this and this success and this sacrifice. But you start to kind of like get into the fiddly bits of it, and especially as they start to bounce off each other, and these characters all kind of want different things, and some of them are acting parallel to one another, and some of them are acting perpendicular to one another, and that creates a different kind of conflict and different kind of tension. I just kind of go with it, and but one of the weird tricks for me is, and it's a reason I'm not a smart person, so I need to write from the beginning to the end in order. I can't Kevin Hearn, wonderful writer. He'll pick a chapter here and a chapter there, and he'll kind of, like Aaron Morgenstern will do these like sort of quilts, like a square up here and a square down there, and by the end there's a story. I cannot do that, and I think the one advantage that has given me is that I am taking the journey along with the reader. So I am getting a sense of rhythm as I go and know when I need to change perspective, or when it's time to like, that was a really intense thing, we need to break that up and move to a different, because like I, as the writer, am trying to like experience it as you go. So writing from start to finish, because I don't have the capacity to mix it up, I think has helped in that regard.
Excellent.
Brendan, where do you want to take us, sir?
All right, I want to throw one more kind of Wanderer's Wayward tangential question. So given the size, given the content, these books draw the inevitable comparison to like Swan Song and The Stand. So my question is, if you could only keep one, which one is it? Swan Song or The Stand?
It'd be Swan Song, and I hate to say that because The Stand is brilliant, and I adore The Stand deeply. But the Swan Song was, for lack of a better term, it was my first, and it hit me in a way. Swan Song taught me a lot, right? Because first of all, huge epic book, giant. I think the paperback I have is 987 pages. I mean, it's a monster. And it like at that time that I read it, I was personally feeling the like nuclear anxiety, the like, hey, you could wake up and then everything would be annihilated. So then what? You're just like, I could just sleep and then die. That's cool. So as a book that's predominantly about nuclear attack and nuclear winter, it's weirdly comforting. Like, it's not a comforting book. It's a hard, angry, insane, like the straitjacket game, and people getting buried under mountains, and then keloid cancers on your face. Like, it's a nightmare of a book. Cockroaches and snakes. Like, it's a very terrifying book, but like, I don't find it that it exacerbates the fear that I have. It actually sort of cathartically got rid of it. So it helps deal with anxiety in a way. And I think writing horror does the same thing. But then just as a story, it's such an epic, weird, very American story. And The Stand also is brilliant. And I love The Stand. I think it's a little of a straighter line than the Swan Song is. Swan Song has a lot more janky edges and sort of turns and that you don't necessarily anticipate. The Stand, for in a good way, I think is definitely a little more of that Tolkien-esque sort of like good versus evil, and a very clear sort of battle at the end. And whereas Swan Song is just like, what is this guy on that he's writing this book? Like, this is amazing. So but just as my first, it imprinted so strongly upon me in terms of horror and epic storytelling.
Which version, though, Brennan, of The Stand?
Oh, that's a good question too.
I've only read the uncut version.
After we had a guest pitch us on the
Daniel Bennett,
the original version, Daniel Barnett. I picked it up and I have not gotten to it yet. So I've read the uncut version 2 or 3 times, but I still have not read the original. So I cannot answer that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think I, as like a reader of those books, I think I prefer the uncut just because it just gives you more. And sometimes like a story like that, you're like, I'll just take more, whatever it is, I will take more. I have a vague memory of the initial one being maybe a little cleaner, but I don't always like cleaner. Like there's John Horner Jacobs, great writer, really one of our, just like an unsung horror writer we should have, pictures of him hanging in our homes. This Dark Earth zombie novel, which is a really great zombie novel, but he has a chapter in there. It's just about these guys figuring out how to get a train going, and it's kind of not super connected to the rest of the story. Like going back to that whole thing about like fat and flavor and what you cut and what you don't, like that did not get cut. And I think if I were a merciless editor, I would have cut that chapter, but it's like the best chapter in that book. And it just sort of has like a spirit, and it brings, even though it doesn't bring plot points together, it sort of shows what they're fighting for and what like is what's taken and what's lost and what's the cost is. And it's such a good piece, and it's I would have hated to have lost that. So sometimes I like the janky edges and the messy parts of fiction.
We had him on
exactly what occurred to me.
I was just gonna say we had him on season 1, didn't we?
Really?
Yeah.
I should listen to that. He's great.
He's smart as hell, man.
He's really smart. Yeah. Yeah. We share an agent, so that's how I got to know him.
Oh, cool. Brennan, sorry for cutting you off.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to write an intro to his Lush and Seething Hell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a collection. Yeah. I was just going to say that's exactly what kind of came to me as soon as we started talking cut versus uncut, is that whole idea of, does every single aspect have to serve the story? Because what you get in that uncut is, you might get some storylines and some plot threads that don't necessarily take you to Las Vegas at the end. But
right.
If the writer has created an immersive world and they're giving me an opportunity to spend an extra 300 or 400 pages in that world, I'm going to take it. If I want to be there, I want to be there. Let me explore the, side quests.
Yeah. And the trick is it still has to, the weird thing is it still kind of has to work. Like that 300-400 pages still has to be something that's interesting in some capacity, even if it's not additive in a sort of a plot sense. It's still like it has to be somewhere you want to live. It can't be a dull 300-400 pages. It can't be a miserable 300-400 pages. So that's like the sort of line. It's like what I say with, there's so many like nuance and so much that goes into this, like talking about writing and how, so much of writing is not writing. But then also at the end of the day, so much of writing still has to be writing. Like it only matters if you actually write it at the end. Just like in fiction, so much has to be like, well, everything has to fight for its supper and everything has to be kill your darlings, do this. But at the same time, it doesn't. And you can put all this fat and flavor in there, but that fat has to still bring flavor. It can't just be, gruel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to pick your brain, Chuck, on how you.
You're going to ask me where I buried the bodies?
I figured it out by now, man.
Yeah, we're the
Vegas.
same. She gets it. Also, she helped me hide them. So, I mean, that's
Just a few.
just 3 or 4.
I'd like to talk about how you raise up newer writers, particularly how the most recent one I saw was a blurb for Haley Piper's No Gods for Drowning.
God, what a book. Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, but yeah,
it's cool.
I want to hear your thoughts on paying it forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's vital. I don't know how else to say that. It's really important. I think the writer community is not as big as you think, and I think it's important to leave a light on and a ladder out. For everybody who's coming up behind you. Just as I've had people do that for me, which is very nice. I've had the grace of kinder, more powerful writers to just even lending you a word of encouragement is meaningful. But then the blurb thing, like I don't know. It's first of all, like I'm really fortunate because I'm reading, work by people like Haley or Eric LaRocca that are just really good and far better than I could ever write. So like I feel like I want to celebrate that. I mean, just it's like such a weird honor that everyone was like, they're going to hand me their book and be like, will you say something nice about it? I mean, admittedly, in a marketing context, I understand the point of it, but like, will you, I hope you like this and I hope you'll say something about it. And that's an honor. Obviously I can't do it with everything, just in terms of timing. And sometimes the book doesn't click. But generally, yeah, paying it forward is really important. Just because you're trying to create a community and an ecosystem that's existent. And it's such a cliched thing, like the rising tide lifts all boats, but it does. Writers are not in competition with each other. Every once in a while, you have like someone gets in this tear about how we're all, people only have so much money and they're only going to buy so many books. Well, that's true, but that doesn't mean like I'm competing with you on the bookshelf. Like and I understand there's only so much shelf space on a bookshelf, and like I'm not fighting Tolkien. Like he's there because people are buying his books. I'm not fighting with Stephen King. Like that's how that works. And at the same time, as much as it would be easy to imagine that I am somehow locked in a struggle with Stephen King for shelf space, at the same time, probably the reason, we're all getting shelf space is because he started kind of horror as a thing. I won't say he started it, but I think he really sort of like lionized it as like a bookshelf space, right? Like Stephen King became such a big thing along with Barker and Kuntz and so forth at that time. And that marked shelf space that we didn't have before. So the fact that I get to do that is in part because of people who dug that space out. And, so I feel like that's something, a chain, there's a chain of that. And so it's worth kind of going the other direction too. It came from them and it goes from me. Well said.
Mercedes, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I agree. Colleagues are not competition. Like I don't like that mindset. And Brandon Sanderson and his Kickstarter or whatever, and everyone lost their ever-loving minds. And I just support writers, support people you like, support creatives. I don't see the attack aspect. It's just it's childish to me. I don't have time for that crap. I have real problems. There's a pandemic that went on.
Yeah, there's a pandemic.
Like there are things going on. But people take it so to heart, and people get so invested in the fact that I don't know, I need to tear you down, or I need to do this. And I love to support writers. I love it. I love the things that I'm reading. I had oh my goodness, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. Michael Harris Conan. I want to say, I'm probably saying it backwards. But he asked me to blurb one of his collection that came out, and it was beautiful. It was stunning.
Effects vary.
Yes.
Yeah, I literally just posted his guest post yesterday on Terrible Minds. Yeah,
yeah, I loved it so
That's
much.
Funny.
And I will have to let him know. And it made my life better to read that collection. I enjoyed it. It elevated me to read that. And and he's acting like I'm doing him a favor by blurbing it. And I'm like, no, I mean this. Thank you for this because I enjoyed it so much. And I met him because I had judged a writing contest, and he was the winner that I had picked. Like his good. He's so good, and kind of soft and gentle, but brutal at the same time. Kind of reminds me of John Bowden. Who I love John's stuff. And it's not, I mean, sometimes like you said, you can't blurb everybody, right? I didn't ask you to blurb mine. But you can't blurb everybody. You can't, take the time to do everybody, but it's humbling when somebody asks you, because how much work it goes into it. And when you find that book that just clicks with you, that's amazing. Like, that's a gift that they gave us, so why wouldn't we pay it back?
Yeah. You know what? It's worth bringing up now. The biggest reason why Coco means so much to me and literally changed my life in the better perspective is because my maternal grandfather passed away in 2012. And I've always loved him, good relationship. But it wasn't until I read Coco, which is about Vietnam vets for those that haven't read it yet, that it got me thinking, and especially after we talked with Peter, that really got me thinking, if I'm sure you guys can relate to this when you read a book, if I were to write that, and then it dawned on me, the Korean War, most Americans don't talk about it. It's not taught really anywhere in our school system.
Sure.
And I'm like, I'm a writer. So then I've been, for the last year plus, I've been obsessively collecting and researching the Korean War and my grandfather's time there. And I thought that was kind of neat, a little neat fact to bring up, and how he met this South Korean boy over there. And I got letters from him, and not to me, but from him to my great grandmother. And it looks like he taught him how to write English, because there's 3 and they are in Korean characters and English above it. And then it looks like the boy's handwriting. It's messy English, but it can only be his writing that would make sense. And it's just really neat. And I'm finding a connection with a man that was pretty quiet, but very loving. And I didn't know that side of him. And he was just got out of high school when he went to fight this fucked up war that's still affecting a lot of the world today. So I felt like that was kind of worth bringing up. Books, in my opinion, for the best of them, for the best reasons, can change worlds and make everything better.
Yeah, they're like a bridge to readers, especially the right readers.
Yeah. We're gonna wind down now, and I just want to remind everyone, I don't bring this up really ever anymore, probably should. We got a store if you want to check that out. We got hats, mugs, and all that. Go to deadheadspace.com. We're gonna cover currently reading. So Chuck, what are you currently reading? You can say one book, you can however many you want.
Just finished Andy Davidson's Hollow Kind.
Oh, how is it, man? I want to read
that.
I
loved it. Yeah, it's like one of those things. It's like a slow creep, like it soaks in and just pickles you, and it's creepiness. He does like a nice thing where it kind of stories moving this way, and then there's a historical bit sort of that contributes to the present era. So it's cool. I like it a lot. And then I just started Christopher Golden's All Hallows, his sort of Halloween-y book. It's good.
He's got creepy covers.
Fun. He's a fun guy. I like. Good stuff.
I like him.
Yeah,
I told him once that if he has such a kind countenance, right? I told him once if my house was on fire and I would throw him one of my children and take the other, because I would believe he would catch my child and run away with it to safety.
I believe that.
And he was like, "That was weird, but thank you, I'm honored."
You're like, no, this is a promise. Like, there's going to be, I'm going to throw children at you at some point.
Yeah, here, you catch this kid, and he's like, I swear.
Yeah,
I will catch them. Mercedes, what are you currently reading?
Well, I just finished Wayward. But I'm starting Hatchet by Gary Paulson. It's like a children's book, but my daughter's reading it in school and is telling me all about it. And so I try to read what my kids are reading so that we can have a discussion where I'm just not like, So that's what I'm doing now. It's about a kid that's in a car or an airplane crash, and all he has is like a hatchet from the crash and has to live out in the wilderness. So
that's awesome.
It's kind of a jump from your book to this one. One is very, very long and very intricate, and one has like one character.
That's funny. So I am reading Tananarive Dew. Oh man, Ghost Summer. That's it, right, Brennan? I believe
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. That and I'm going back and forth to there's a new audio version of Joe Lansdale's Bubba Hotep, as well as Bubba and the Cosmic Bloodsuckers, which is a prequel to Bubba Hotep. Brennan, what are you currently reading?
I am reading a book called Darling by Miss Mercedes. Now, Mercedes, you and I have talked enough on this show that you probably know that this book is resonating with me, and you can cherry pick those reasons for why it is.
It probably hurts.
I won't go into detail because Mercedes is going to be back in a couple weeks to talk about that book and a whole lot more. But it hurts, but it's also beautiful, which is just kind of the stamp that should go on your work in general. You know what? I'm going to change up my second one because I love you throwing out that you were reading Hatchet because you wanted to kind of have that conversation. My boys are both homeschooled, and they just did a kind of self-directed unit on this book right here, Neil Gaiman's Odd and the Frost Giants. So we kind of all read that together just to talk about it and dissect it and all that good stuff. And of course they were super into it because they love, the Marvel movies, and they're seeing all these characters they know and learning kind of the origins, I suppose, of the derivations of where these characters came from. Pat, back to you. Where are we headed?
Where can people follow you, Chuck?
I would say Twitter, but God only knows what's happening there now. It still exists as of this recording. So I'm definitely there at Chuck Wendig. But then terribleminds.com is always a safe place to find me. Or you can find me on Instagram at Chuck_Wendig.
Yeah, I got no idea what Elon Musk is doing. Why is he even?
He doesn't either so much.
Why is he even fucking around with Twitter, man? Why can't he just go work on his rockets or cars or whatever the hell he's doing?
Because he's terminally online.
I don't get it. He's Black Swan.
He's not smart enough to be Black Swan.
Mercedes, where can people follow you?
Oh, I'm I guess I'm kind of on Twitter sometimes at Mercedes MY, Instagram at Mercedes MY. I'm on Facebook, Mercedes Murdoch Yardley. MercedesMYardley.com is my site.
Brennan, where can people follow you?
Brennan LaFaro on Brennan LaFaro on Twitters and no. We've used that one. It's not funny when I do it anymore. It has to be somebody who comes up with an original spin on it, my driveway when I go to get the mail or whatever. I have to answer the question seriously. So again, if Twitter still exists by the time this airs, I'm most active there. And if it doesn't, then I might just take the opportunity to not try and learn a new platform.
How nice would that be?
You can follow me at PR McDonough. Just guess how to spell that last name if you don't know, or Google it, whatever. And you can follow the show.
It's printed Headspace at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, but not everyone watches. They listen. True. Any final thoughts, Chuck?
No, McDonough. Is that you ever played BioShock? Isn't there a McDonough in BioShock?
I love the first one, and the second one's fun. It's just too short, but I don't know if there's McDonough.
I think there's a McDonough in BioShock. I was just replaying that, and that sounds familiar. Anyway, that's my only. I believe you are conjured from BioShock. That's my.
That'd be cool.
Wouldn't it? I mean, not really, because what a nightmare.
That's true.
I want to know what everybody's playing. You're playing BioShock. I'm playing Xenosaga.
Oh, nice. How is it?
I love it. I played it before, right? And I never finished the whole thing, but it's not as clunky as I remembered. I dug out my old PS2, and so it's the old original,
Sure.
DVDs. And it's not as clunky. It's a lot of fun. I like it a lot. And next I'm doing Parasite Eve again, which is my favorite.
Nice. Oh, that's a good one. If you guys want a good horror game, Inscription, INCRYPTION. It's kind of a card game, but it has a whole story. It's a single player thing. It's pretty creepy in an awesome way.
What is it for, all consoles?
They have it on Steam, and then it's on PlayStation now, and I expect it's coming to the other consoles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I gotta ask, Chuck, did you ever play Half-Life?
Oh, yeah. Half-Life 2. I want to do the VR, Alex, but I don't have a VR rig that will support that game. But Portal, great games. I'm huge.
I loved Half-Life 1. Half-Life 2 is one of the mods. I bring it up because I'm not trying to talk about other guests all the time here, but we had Mark Laidlaw on, and he was.
Oh, did you really? Yeah, I love him.
Yeah,
He's great.
He said, you know what? I don't really want to talk about Half-Life. Been doing that for 30 years. I was like, that's fine. But he brought it up, so I got a chance to ask him about it.
You're like, gotcha.
But it made me think, like, I really wouldn't want to do that shit either. If I got a whole slew of books, music, everything else, and you just want to talk about that one thing, I don't know, man. Mercedes, do you have any final thoughts?
No, that was it. That was a brief intro of my son that decided I was done and just came and touched my nose. That's it.
Just like Chuck.
This was a pleasure. I just enjoyed this so much.
Thank you so much. This is awesome.
Brennan, do you have any final thoughts?
I think it's worth throwing out that we have a 100% success rate for people named Chuck saying "Hey Chuck" when Patrick says "Say hey Chuck." In the future, we're gonna have to really strive to keep that going.
Yeah, without telling them, like you have to. Yeah,
exactly. No, it has to be organic. Chuck, we appreciate your time so much on a Saturday afternoon. Mercedes, we always love having you on, and thank you for making the time to join us. Absolute pleasure, great conversation. Thank you both.
Hard echo. Yeah, my final thoughts are the same. Hard echo. Next week, episode 172 is with Tanana Redo. Very excited for that one. We'll break down pretty much really anything that she's covered. So that's a lot. Listeners, you have many choices in podcasts. Thank you for picking us.
Just one more really quick question. Is this it? Are you doing a trilogy of this book, Chuck?
No plans as yet. Like I didn't even plan to do the sequel. I was like, if Wanderer
sounds like an answer to me.
Yeah, if Wanderer's like it's going to be a standalone, I'm like, if people really like it and it sells well, and I think of a story, I'll write a second one. And I did, and it did sell well. So I have no plans for a third, but if it becomes interesting to do so, maybe I would think about it.
Can I keep that part, or do you want me to cut that out?
Yeah, you can keep that. Yeah.
Oh, okay, sweet.
Yeah.
Anyone else? I don't want to cut anyone off.
Oh, thank you guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye,
Have
y'all.
a good one. See you guys.
Take it easy, everybody.